אתם ניצבים היום כולכם לפני אדוני אלוהיכם, ראשיכם שבטיכם, זקניכם ושוטריכם, כל איש ישראל, טפכם נשיכם, וגרך אשר בקרב מחנך, מחוטף עצך עד שואב מימך. וילך משה וידבר את הדבורים האלה אל כל ישראל, ויאמר עליהם בן 120 שנה אנוכי היום, לא אוכל עוד לצאת ולבוא, ואדוני אמר אלי, לא תעבור את הירדן הזה.
The two Torah portions for this week conclude the entire reading of the Torah for this year. In the next 2 weeks, there will be a celebration of Sukkot, and then the new cycle will begin at the Simchat Torah celebration, and again through the entire year. These are the last two parashot called Nitzavim and Vayelech. Parashat Nitzavim starts with the words of Moses recorded in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 29 verse 10. It says, "You stand today, all of you, before the Lord your God, your chiefs, your tribes, your elders, and your officers, even all the men of Israel, your little ones, your wives, and the alien who is within your camps, from one who chops the wood to one who draws the water, that you may enter into the covenant with the Lord your God, and into the oath which the Lord your God is making with you today." This is a solemn moment of solidification of the covenant, which God wants to enter with a new generation. It's a repetition of what God has said on the Mount Sinai and brought through Moses in the form of the book of the covenant, which was sprinkled with the blood, and the people of Israel said, "Naaseh v'nishma." But this Naaseh v'nishma didn't work. The words were not kept. The golden calf and a Kadesh Varni has postponed the entering of the land for 40 years, has moved the fulfillment of the promises that God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's why the new generation is ready to take on these promises. And that's why this Parashat Nitzavim is the standing acceptance of the covenant of the Lord. There is no cloud of fire, there is no thunder, there is no lightning, none of this what happened in the Mount Sinai 40 years ago, but there are the words of Moses with which he attempts to communicate and convince the people of Israel to really follow the covenant of God, learning from the past lessons which he had been constantly repeating throughout his last speech, which he recorded in the book of Deuteronomy. And the culmination of this is the acceptance of choice. "See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, and death and adversity." Our God is the God of love. And the love is a choice that person has to make. There are options in this world. And there is nothing God can do if we choose to go away from Him. This is why there is absolutely nothing except the appeal to choose life and the proof that all this covenant, all these commandments, all these ordinances are made specifically so that people of Israel would live. This is an interesting discussion which was among the rabbinic circles, because sometimes, and there are rabbis who believe that God gave the commandments to test the faithfulness of Israel, regardless of whether or not they make sense. The commandments should not be questioned, but they should be kept, because God is like a king who wants to put the loyalty of his subject at the test. Well, the other opinion also exists. It is emphasized by other rabbis that the commandments are given actually so that a human being could live by them. Especially in the tractate Shabbat, in the Talmud, this discussion comes about whether or not pikuach nefesh, the issue of saving the life, overrides the Shabbos. And the conclusion is, yes, it does override the Shabbos. If a person is dying on the Sabbath, his life must be saved, even at the cost of breaking the commandment which admonishes not to do any work. In fact, that was an essence of the discussion between Jesus and Pharisees when he healed several people during the Sabbath. And the major argument for pikuach nefesh principle to stand is the understanding that the commandments are given because the people must live by them, not die through them. And that is exactly what the admonition Moses gives to the people of Israel. Choose life, and you shall live by keeping your commandments, the commandments of God. Unfortunately for Moses, the destiny is different. He has made his last commands and ordinances with the people. It says here in verse 7 of chapter 31, and this is actually the beginning of the Parashat Vayelech. It says here, "Then Moses called to Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, 'Be strong and courageous, for you shall go with this people into the land which the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them. And you shall give it to them as an inheritance. The Lord is the one who goes ahead of you, and he will be with you, and he will not fail you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed.'" In other words, Moses performs the public transfer of power. Earlier in the book of Numbers, God commanded Moses to actually ordain Joshua and lay his hand upon Joshua and give to Joshua from his spirit. That is a good illustration of what the gesture of smicha, leaning the hand, means, is transferring of something, the same way as the sinner transfer his sin upon the head of the animal in the sanctuary. In the same fashion, Moses has transferred his power to Joshua to lead the people of Israel. And now Moses has commanded to the people of Israel and says, "Moses wrote the law and gave it to the priest, the sons of Levi, who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord to all elders of Israel. And Moses commanded them, saying, At the end of every 7 years, at the time of the years of remission of debt, at the feast of the booth, when all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God at the place which he will choose, you shall read this law in front of all Israel in their hearing. And that is exactly why the yearly Torah reading cycle starts after the feast of Sukkot. This is the command of Moses. And this is a very interesting command because we see how Ezra instituted the public reading of the Torah, which is carried out in the synagogues throughout the world today. And this is written in the book of Nehemiah, chapter 8. But we see here one of the last actions Moses did, the last ordinances he gave, is to read the Torah to the people of Israel. This command, this process of Torah study, Torah reading was not supposed to cease. And then Moses places this book, this scroll of Moses, of his book, of the Torah, into the Holy of Holies in front of the ark, pointing to its uttermost importance. And therefore it ends the composition of the law. And now the Constitution of Israel, the revelation written on the tablets, is inside the ark, and the entire Torah scroll is placed besides the ark. This is the anchor, the foundation of the Israel as a nation of everyone's faith. Moses called to Israel to choose life. But the destiny of Moses is a little different. It says here in verse 14, the Lord speaks to Moses, "Behold, the time for you to die is near." This is interesting. The New American Standard Bible translates it a bit freely. The literal translation of this text is like this: "The days are coming, are approaching for you to die." Rabbis meditate about this expression. The days are approaching for you to die. Yes, Moses is 120 years old, and it was known to him for quite a while, since the time when he struck the rock twice. It was known for him that he would die. In fact, the Parashat Vayitchanan starts with Moses telling people of Israel that he pled to God to let him into the land, but God said no. In fact, what is written in the book of Numbers chapter 12, that Moses was the most humble man, was really true. Because in spite of the fact that God told Moses, "You're not going to enter the land, you are going to die," there is no words of contempt with God's decision we hear from Moses' mouth. The only things what we hear is the words of worry about the destiny of Israel. From the very beginning of the book of Deuteronomy, this is all what Moses dedicates his entire life, is to give the final instruction to the people of Israel before his life, before he breathes the last breath. The rabbis wonder in the Deuteronomy Rabbah, the Midrash to the book of Deuteronomy, why is this expression so long? The days are approaching for you to die. And they come to conclusion that God speaks it very, very slowly just because it is painful for God to lose Moses. And the time has arrived. Moses gives his last instruction. He even composes his last song. There are 2 songs which are in the book of Torah written by Moses. The first one in Exodus chapter 15, the song of joy and praise, which he co-authors with his sister Miriam. And actually Miriam sings it with the tambourine and with the joy. And this is after they see how the Pharaoh's army has drowned in the Red Sea. And now it's a different song. It's actually the last, very last parasha of the entire Torah, called Ha'azinu. Ha'azinu Hashamayim va'adabera. This song is written in a very, very solemn language where Moses is calling the earth and the heavens as the witnesses to the covenant. By the way, that's exactly why, the reason why in Isaiah, the book of Isaiah chapter 1, Isaiah calls for the heaven and earth to be witnesses again, because they saw how the people of Israel had sealed the covenant, how they said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we shall keep it, we shall observe it, and how the covenant later was broken. And this poem actually makes a conclusion, a summary of what was happening. It's a poem about the love that God had to Israel, and about Israel, which is called by the very rare name Yeshurun, which actually is presented like untamed horse. There are words there. When Yeshurun got fat, he really got strong and he kicked. You know, it's like somebody, I know some people who have horses, and how much it takes to tame the horse. And it's not only physically painful when you know this horse for a number of years, and then it kicks you, but it's painful because you did so much. Why did this horse do this? You don't know. And that's Moses here really uses this example to show the feelings, how God is being hurt when Israel rejects him, when Israel gets prosperous and forgets about him. And of course, this is not all about Israel. This is about every individual who makes the covenant with God, because God feels hurt when we break this covenant. And then it was time for Moses to go. He gave his last commands to Joshua, the son of Nun, and he walks upon the Mount Nebo, the tall mountain, which is right across the Jordan River. When you walk on the top of this mountain, you look, you literally see on a clear day the Mediterranean. You are able to see the land all across from east to west, you see the entire Jordan River. You see the Jericho. And it's a beautiful, beautiful sight, especially today when you go like from Egypt, and Egypt is extremely dry, and it's not a cleanest country. And Jordan, it's a little better. It's not as dirty, as overpopulated as Egypt, but still it's very dry country. And then you go out and to the Mount Nebo, and you see the entire land of Israel, green, exactly as the Lord told, the land which is flowing with milk and honey. And Moses dies, verse 5 of Exodus 34. The servant of the Lord died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in the valley, in the land of Moab, opposite of Baal Peor, but no man knows his burial place. This is a very interesting text. The text shows that God himself has buried Moses, because nobody knows where his grave is. He was there all alone. It's even incomprehensible how this part was written, because when we read verse 34, we see how Moses is looking at the land of Israel. It looks like everything goes from his own eyes, and there is no witness with whom he can share his feeling. Probably Joshua wrote this book, the end of the book, and added to the Torah. Some of the commentators believe. Some dare to believe that Moses was so faithful to God, so obedient to God, that before he finished the writing of the entire scroll of the Torah, he literally was inspired by God and described his own feelings before his death, and then went and experienced them. I don't know the answer. It's difficult. It's a mystery. But the death of Moses is an example of the death of the great man, humble and faithful and obedient to the Lord until the last day, until the last second of his life. Why God did not let Moses to enter the land? Was it just from God to just say, hey, you did it twice. You're not faithful. I don't care about you. Isn't this a God whom Moses served all his life? Yes, it is true, Moses had great responsibilities. Yes, it is true that there is no prophet, and there has not been any other prophet like Moses. But isn't it Moses human? Does he have a right for his own feelings? This whole ordeal with God telling him that he won't enter into the land when he strikes the rock twice happened in the middle of two deaths. His sister dies, and then his brother dies. And everybody in Israel is dying during this 40 years of journey. Couldn't God understand and be merciful? Well, as we say, as we just noticed, the time for Moses to die was approaching very, very slowly. But the death is the destiny of everybody. And this is why we have a beautiful example of another great man of God, whose life is described throughout the book of Kings, and his death is described about in the book of Kings, 2 Kings chapter 2. This man is Elijah, who also knew about his death, and he was facing it with the Lord in the same fashion. And it came about when the Lord was about to take up Elijah by a whirlwind to heaven, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. We see here the struggle that Elijah has before his death. And Elisha is right at his hand, wants to get the best for him. He wants to get that spirit. This is why these two chapters, the life of Joshua and Moses and Elijah and Elisha, they parallel. The same way Moses gave from his spirit to Joshua, and Elisha was asking for the Spirit, for the double portion of the Spirit which was on Elijah. And nobody knew what actually was going to happen. But the chariot of fire came, and it picked up Elijah, and Elijah went to heaven alive, never experiencing death. Moses did experience death. But somehow, in the book of Mark, chapter 9, that gospel we recommend you to read as a complement to our Torah and Haftarah reading for this week. We see Jesus at the Mount of Transfiguration, and we see how Moses and Elijah appeared talking to Jesus, Mark 9 verse 4. And that was a surprise for many. Yes, nobody really knew where Moses was buried, but everybody knew that Elijah was alive. And now Moses stands alive with Elijah talking to Jesus, symbolizing two groups of people. The people who will see resurrection after their death, and the people who, like Elijah, will face God and never see and experience death. In any case, God did not want to do harm to Moses. Yes, Moses never saw the land where he was leading his people, but Moses has already experienced a better land. We don't know exactly how it happened. There is a little hint in the New Testament, in the Epistle of Jude, how Michael fought with Satan for the body of Moses. We don't know exactly when it happened and how it happened, but we know for sure that Moses, although he thought he's not getting the best from God, but because of his obedience to God, he received a better prize. A prize which everyone, even those who are in Jerusalem today, are looking forward. The prize of heavenly Jerusalem.